The history of the Hawaiian Islands before their discovery by Captain James Cook in 1778 is obscure. This famous navigator, who named the islands in honor of the Earl of Sandwich, was received by the natives with many demonstrations of astonishment and delight. And offerings and prayers were presented to him by their priest in one of the temples, and though in the following year he was killed by the natives, once he landed upon Kealakekua Bay in Hawaii, his bones were preserved by the priest and continued to receive offerings and homage from the people till the abolition of idolatry. At the time of Cook's visit, the archipelago seemed to have been divided into three distinct kingdoms: Hawaii, Oahu, and Maui. Lanai and Molokai were subdivided. On the death of the chief who ruled Hawaii at the time, there succeeded one named Kamehameha, who lived from 1736 to 1819, who appears to have been a man of quick perception and great force of character. When Vancouver visited the islands in 1792, he left sheep and neat cattle and laid down the keel of a European ship for Kamehameha. 10 or 12 years later, Kamehameha had approximately 20 vessels of 25 to about 50 tons, which traded among the islands. He afterwards purchased others from foreigners. Having encouraged a warlike spirit in his people and having introduced firearms, Kamehameha attacked with great force and overcame the chief of other kingdoms. One after another, until 1795, he became the undisputed master of the whole group. He made John Young and Isaac Deas Americans from one of the ships of Captain Metcalfe, which visited the island in 1789. His advisors encouraged trade with other foreigners. It is worth nothing that the people living in many areas in Hawaii never ceded sovereignty to the Hawaiian kingdom established by the King Kamehameha. The people in these areas were simply conquered. However, as the international community recognized the Hawaiian kingdom's ownership of the entire Hawaiian Islands, these political entities passed out of being. On the 29th of January, at noon, his sister, the regent, took the oath to maintain the Constitution of 1887 and was proclaimed queen under the title of Liliuokalani. The legislative session of 1892, during which 4 changes of ministry took place, was protracted to 8 months, chiefly by her determination to carry through the opium and lottery bills and to have a pliable cabinet. She had a new constitution drawn up, practically providing for an absolute monarchy and disfranchising a large class of citizens who had voted since 1887. The constitution, drawn up, so the royal party declared, in reply to a petition signed by thousands of these natives. She undertook the ministry's shrank from the responsibility of so revolutionary an act, and with difficulty prevailed upon her to postpone the execution of her design. A committee of safety was appointed at a public meeting, which formed a provisional government and reorganized the volunteer military companies, which had been disbanded in 1890. The provisional government called a mass meeting of citizens, which met on the afternoon of the 6th and ratified its action. The United States steamer Boston, which had unexpectedly arrived from Hilo on the Big Island of Hawaii on the 14th, landed a small force on the evening of the 16th. At the request of the United States Minister, Mr. J.L. Stevens, and a committee of residents to protect the lives and property of American citizens in case of riot or incendiarism. On the 17th, the Committee of Safety took possession of the government building and issued a proclamation declaring a monarchy to be abrogated and establishing a provisional government. Meanwhile, 2 companies of volunteer troops arrived and occupied the grounds on the beaches. By the advice of her ministers, the Queen surrounded under protest, appealing to the government of the United States to reinstate her authority. Despite the landing of American troops, they did not fire a single shot. No one was killed or injured. Historical revolutionists have falsely called the presence of American soldiers as being an invasion. This is clearly untrue. The soldiers did nothing more than protect property and were not involved in any fighting or taking of any possessions of government buildings. A treaty of annexation was negotiated with the United States during the next month, just before the close of President Benjamin Harrison's administration. But it was withdrawn on the 9th of March, 1893, by President Harrison's successor, President Cleveland. The new president sent James Blount to Hawaii to investigate the American role in the Hawaiian evolution. Unfortunately, he failed to swear in witnesses or even interview some of the key members of the revolt. The resulting document, the Blount Report, was politically biased, as the Cleveland administration used this report to cast doubts on the foreign policy of President Harrison. As such, it pretended an inaccurate version of the events of 1893 in Hawaii. On the 30th of May, 1894, a convention was held to frame a constitution for the Republic of Hawaii, which was proclaimed on the 4th of July following, with S.B. Dole as its first president. Toward the end of the same year, a plot was formed to overthrow the Republic and to restore the monarchy. A cargo of arms and ammunition from San Francisco, California, were secretly landed at a point near Honolulu and Oahu, where a company of native royalists were collected on the 6th of January in 1995. Intending to capture the government buildings by surprise that night, with the aid of their allies in the city, a premature encounter with a squad of police armed the town and broke up their plans. There were several other skirmishes during the following week, resulting in the capture of the leading conspirators, with most of their followers. The ex-queen, on whose premises arms and ammunition and a number of incriminating documents were found, was arrested and imprisoned for 9 months in the former place. On the 24th of January, 1895, she formally renounced all claim to the throne and took oath of allegiance to the Republic. The ex-queen and 48 others were granted conditional pardon on the 7th of September, and on the following New Year's Day, the remaining prisoners were set at liberty. On the inauguration of President McKinley in March 1897, negotiations with the United States were resumed. Hawaii was formally annexed by a joint resolution of Congress shortly thereafter. Texas was also annexed by a joint resolution of Congress preceding this act. The formal transfer of sovereignty took place on the 12th of August, 1898, when the flag of the United States was raised over the executive building with impressive ceremonies. An attack on Pearl Harbor on the 7th of December 1941 by Japan was a trigger for the United States' entry into World War II. Hawaii served as an important base for operations in the Pacific, and it helped the USA to win the war on the Pacific. The citizens of Hawaii voted overwhelmingly in favor of becoming an American state in 1958. President Dwight D. Eisenhower signed a bill on March 18, 1959, which allowed for Hawaiian statehood. Hawaii formally became the 50th state of the Union on August 21, 1959. The United Nations certified this result by removing Hawaii from the list of non-self-governing territories. There is little popular sentiment in Hawaii for independence from the United States of America, although a small vocal group repeatedly advocates for this. Independence from the USA would be virtually impossible to achieve anyway. Hawaii is recognized by international law as an American possession. Further, the American Civil War clearly established that an American state may not leave the Union. Independence for Hawaii would require an amendment to the American Constitution allowing states to secede following by a vote of all Hawaiian citizens, not just those of native Hawaiian descent, actually favoring independence. My name is GRoth, and this has been my speech on how Hawaii has become a part of the USA.